So we didn't go into this saying, we're going to poke a few holes and do some big step outs and arm wave a deposit before we get there. We went in, we raised $30 million. We set up a program that was essentially fence drilling. And for anybody that doesn't know geologically what fence drilling is, it's when you lay out a grid of lines, much like I described for the geochem sampling at the beginning of the conversation. You lay out lines running east to west across the system, across this big copper system. You space those lines every 100 meters moving to the north. In our case, it's over 20 kilometers. And then you drill every 50 meters across the system from the east to west or west to east. So what that means is you end up with a grid of drill holes, very tightly spaced, and over the entire corridor looking for the east and west edges of this thing. And so what it allows you to do is very quickly delineate the overall footprint or the overall mineralized area at Dumbwa. And then you can go back in on the second pass and be more refined and more targeted and go after those areas that are showing the highest grade and the most potential for tonnage that would be mineable.
Good day, everybody. It's me, Steve Yang, here with Natural Resource Stocks, and I have with me Adrian O'Brien, Vice President of Business Development and Communications with Midnight Sun Mining. Adrian, how are you?
Doing good, Steve. How are you?
Not bad. Adrian, before we start, for those who don't know about Midnight Sun Mining, if you'd be so kind as to give us your ticker, where you're trading, your website, real quick.
Sure, yeah. So Midnight Sun Mining, trading symbol is on the TSX Venture, and it's MMA, like the fighting. So MMA, it's an easy one to remember. I know, I couldn't have picked it better myself. And midnightsunmining.com is our website. So you can go there. Of course, we keep our deck and everything updated. You can download those directly from the front page. So everything you need is there, and I'm the point of contact. So if you have questions or anything you want to talk more about after we do this, then you can reach out to me directly through the website. My number, my email are there, and happy to chat anytime.
Well, thank you for that, Adrian. Adrian, would you be so kind as just to give us the 50,000 foot view, the elevator pitch, or just a quick summary of what you guys are all about and why you guys are relevant?
Sure. So we are, let's say, working in what I would call one of the best spots on the planet for copper exploration right now. Truly, it is a district that I think you could refer to as the number one spot for copper exploration based on interest from majors, based on the groups that are working there, and just the sheer number of flagship operations from major copper producers. So we're working in an area in Zambia, so in South Central Africa, sorry, Sub-Saharan Africa. So in Zambia, in part of the copper belt. So the Zambian copper belt is absolutely prolific. There's two different parts to it. There's the Zambia-Congo Copperbelt, which actually straddles the Zambia-Congo border, and that's home to dozens of mines. And then there's an area that is really kind of newer. It's really been around for about 20 years, and that's called the Domes region. So this is the area we are working in, and we have a very large system, brand new copper system that we discovered last year. It's been known for a long time, but never systematically drilled off. And so when you look at the area that we're working, we are absolutely surrounded by major copper producers. First Quantum's Kansanshi mine is 6 kilometers away from us. Barrick's Lumwana mine, which is their flagship, and the reason that Barrick changed their name from Barrick Gold to Barrick Mining, 20 kilometers to the west of us. Ivanhoe's Kamoa-Kakula, one of the largest and highest grade deposits and mines in the world for copper, sits about 90 kilometers north of us. And China Molybdenum's Tenke Fungurume sits right above us. So, you also have First Quantum Sentinel Mine and a few other newer projects, new discoveries. There has not been a major scale discovery in this belt for over 20 years, until we discovered Dumbwa and confirmed that mineralization last August. So this is a new thing. We've been working on it for the last 12 months, but we're truly working in one of the best places in the world. And, when you talk about those major companies that are there and those big top tier operations, what we aren't talking about are the other companies that are in the region looking. So, for example, I mentioned Ivanhoe's Kamoa-Kakula. That is a massive copper deposit. It's 1 billion tons. It's actually 1 billion at 2.73% copper. That is only one of Ivanhoe's operations in the belt. Ivanhoe has 8 1,000 square kilometers of grassroots property in Zambia. To the west of us, they're exploring and looking for a new discovery, and they don't yet have one. You have Rio Tinto, you have BHP, you have Glencore, you have Anglo American, you have Freeport-McMoRan, all sniffing around, all looking for something, but haven't yet found it. So I always say it's the perfect storm for an M&A opportunity. If somebody like Midnight Sun can put a brand new 3 or 5 or 700 million ton deposit on the map, or let's say a billion ton deposit, most of the mines that I've just described to you over the last couple of minutes are billion-plus-ton deposits that sit right at surface. That's what makes this belt so special. But if you could take one of those deposits and put it on the map today, it'll be a perfect storm for M&A. Every group in the area is going to want it. So we're on track for a new discovery. We have a new discovery. We're now fleshing it out and showing the world how big it is. Right in the heart of the best belt on the planet right now for copper exploration. So that's kind of the quick thesis. And we do have two assets. So we mentioned Dumbwa. I don't know if we've mentioned it yet, but I have now. So Dumbwa is our flagship. That is this new big copper system that we discovered, and it's a system that runs for 20 kilometers, and we're in the midst of drilling it off. So we've drilled about a third of it so far, and we also have an asset up to the north, still part of our same property, but an asset up to the north, which we took to an indicated resource last year, and that's a very high-grade oxide copper deposit that sits at surface, and we are in the midst of a sale process right now. So lots to unpack, lots to talk about. That's the overall view of Midnight Sun to get started.
That's great. When you talk about Dumbwa, what I saw was it's got a pretty, it seems like is it true that it's the largest and highest grade soil anomaly in Zambia?
It is.
And if you can talk a little bit more about just the discovery, the timeline, as well as the what you've done so far to verify your story.
Sure. So this thing, the genesis of this was a target that was actually discovered quite a long time ago, probably over 20 years ago. And that is this Dumbwa soil anomaly. So the soil anomaly at Dumbwa is basically defined by about 15,000 samples. Maybe it's 10 or 12,000 samples over 20 kilometers. And this is soil sampling that was done. I'm sure you've heard of this before, but the way they do soil sampling, they lay out a grid, maybe it's 50 meters by 50 meters or 100 by 100, and they take a sample at intervals across that entire grid. Now, Dumbwa was sampled multiple generations by multiple companies. So First Quantum did some of that sampling, Anglo American did some of that sampling. And what they ended up with is a soil anomaly that ranges from 250 ppm, so that's like 0.025% copper, up to 0.73. 0.73 or 7,300 ppm is what it actually exceeds the grade of the mines that surround us. So you're talking about very high grade copper in some areas, and certainly stretching over 20 kilometers, which is an astronomically large footprint. And so that was a big copper system. And First Quantum, 20 years ago, did some drilling there. So this is property that they once owned. It was part of their exploration package. But when they were putting Kansanshi into production, they had to shed some licenses, and this was just part of the extra exploration ground that they shed. So we picked it up 14 years ago. We had this giant soil anomaly, and it had never been systematically drilled, despite First Quantum drilling 21 holes stretched out over that whole 20 kilometers, and they hit on virtually every hole. So, just a case of figuring out how it all hangs together. But having never undergone a systematic drill off, there was no telling what that big geochem anomaly sits over top of, other than in this area, if you have a soil anomaly like that, it's generally coincident with a big copper system. And taking it one step further, there's another thing there that occurs on these big deposits, and it's a biological anomaly called a copper clearing. And so we have this thing at Dumbwa as well. They had it at Kamoa-Kakula, they had it at Lumwana, they had it at Kansanshi. And what it is that this area is quite rich in vegetation, lots of trees, lots of grass. And where you have the very high copper tenor in soil, so right at surface, it's toxic to vegetation, so nothing can grow. And you end up with these large areas that are big, essentially bald patches with no trees and no vegetation in the middle of an otherwise rich area. And there's sort of an X marks the spot as far as locating one of these big systems. And we have that at Dumbwa. So it is a pretty extraordinary target.
Several questions, Adrian. So, why you mentioned a lot of companies, you mentioned a lot of
Mhm.
projects that seem to be very big, well known, respected. I mean, for Barrick to go from gold to mining, I mean, that says something. So, one, why is everybody there? If you
Yeah,
can also talk about the roads, infrastructure that's there, the access to
yeah,
water, and then two,
sure.
uh, why Zambia? I mean, is that risky? I mean, if you can talk a little bit about the jurisdiction, not only with permitting but safety, as well as what people need to know about what is really like.
Sure. So let's just reverse it and I'll go back through all of that and we'll start with the jurisdiction itself. So Zambia as a jurisdiction is it's top tier. This is considered a top tier jurisdiction. You have a country who is very stable, very safe, no history of civil unrest, no issues in Zambia whatsoever, very little corruption. This within Africa, typically you'll hear Zambia, Namibia, Botswana listed as the top three places to work. Zambia and Namibia flip-flop between top place and second place, depending on who you talk to and when you talk to them. But Zambia is a globally top-tier jurisdiction. And I'll give you a few examples. Proper democratically elected government, proper mining act in place, and it's been that way for many decades. 75% of their export earnings are from copper. Now, you want to talk about a mining-centric nation. I can't think of too many that 75% of the country's export earnings are a single metal
Yeah.
or even just mining in general, right? So you truly have a top-tier producing jurisdiction backed with government support. And taking that a step further, President Hichilema, the current president in Zambia, he's out there banging the drum and saying that Zambia wants to be number two or three in the world. They're probably number nine or 10 right now for copper, global copper output. They
Yeah.
want to be number two or three in the world. So they're doing everything they can to amplify things, fast track permitting, and bring light to the fact that they're a great jurisdiction. So, that's all really positive. Now, if you think about Zambia and locationally speaking, it's sub-Saharan Africa, so we're in southern Africa, and it's a landlocked country. So you've got Tanzania on one side, Angola on the other, and then you have to think about, well, how do you get this copper out? So I mentioned First Quantum's Kansanshi mine. They've built a smelter on site. It's one of the most efficient smelters in the world, and they actually take their copper as far as a final product in order to be able to ship it. Other companies or other groups there ship out different ways. But what has happened over the last little while, and you want to talk about infrastructure, is something called the Lobito Corridor. Now, the Lobito Corridor is a rail line. It's been talked about for quite some time. The project was started originally by Trafigura, and the Lobito Corridor is a rail line that connects to a western port in Angola that would allow the US to ship copper from Zambia and Angola back to the US. The Lobito corridor stretches all the way across Angola into Zambia and it connects four assets: Sentinel, Lumwana, our Solwezi project, which includes Dumbwa, and Kansanshi to that western port in Angola, allowing that rail line to transport this copper back to a western port and get it back to the US. And that project's being built by the US government or funded by the US government. So it's a $4.4 billion project. And if that isn't thesis backing positivity, I don't know what is. Pretty incredible. I don't think I've ever seen the US step up like that. Different groups are taking it seriously. And this is something where we can see right off the bat that this is important globally. This is important to the US, and this is a very important jurisdiction for copper. Now, taking that a step further, there is another rail line being built. It's being built by the Chinese government, and it goes out through Tanzania to an eastern port in order to get that copper to China as well. So there's interest from both kind of major superpowers around this area, and that's a pretty impressive and positive part of our story.
So, Adrian, I want to go back a little bit. You mentioned that you acquired this property. Why I know you touched upon it a little bit, but if you can talk a little bit more about why they were willing to give it up, and what excited you guys about it at the same time, and why has it been dormant? What have you guys been doing for the last several years? Did the economics just not make sense? Why is this a good time, and why is it an exciting story at this point?
For sure. So when you look at the history of it, I mentioned that First Quantum once owned this property, and First Quantum had a huge number of licenses in Zambia. I believe at one point they had 20 licenses. Now in Zambia, there's something called the use or lose it rule, or certainly that's what we call it. It is part of their mining act that if you have licenses, you can only carry so many. You can only carry so many licenses, and you have to be active on those licenses, or else you have to shed part of the property. So every time you do a renewal, whether it's a 3-year renewal or a 5-year renewal, you have to shed a certain percentage. And at the end of the day, it's to keep companies from just buying up real estate and keeping it, right? Like if you're just tying up tons of ground and you're not doing anything with it, then nothing is moving ahead. So at one point, this was part of 20 licenses that First Quantum owned. They weren't able to carry that many. So they were allowed to carry a max of 5, and they had to shed the rest. And those 5 licenses essentially comprised the Kansanshi mine. So around the time that they were putting this into production, they had to shed a certain number of licenses. And this was just unfortunately, it was the piece that ended up on the chopping block because it was the least advanced, not because it was bad or not because there was anything wrong with the geology. So it was just unfortunate timing from them for their holdings, but didn't change anything about Dumbwa. Dumbwa was a really compelling target. It had all the makings of something significant. And so that was picked up by a speculator. Now, in Zambia, there's a fair number of these individuals that will grab properties just on the hope that eventually a company like a Midnight Sun comes along and wants to do a deal. And so this company was holding on to this property, and they were for a fair number, fair amount of time. And 14 years ago, we optioned it from them. And so we were able to option this property and earn into ownership of this, which we've done. So we own 100% of what we're doing at Dumbwa. And we control all of our property 100%. And that's really, really important when you're thinking about this story. But it doesn't change the fact that, this is an area where you have to progress your projects, you have to work on them and make sure that they're moving forward. So part of our approach has shifted a bit. Over the years, the company was dealing with very low copper prices. A lack of interest in places like Zambia, where the jurisdiction could be seen very much like you mentioned, Steve, where it was, it's viewed as it's Africa. Does that mean it's difficult?
Yeah.
It doesn't. It's not. It's an easy place to work. But when you're thinking about going out to the market, let's look at the copper price at that time. Just take Lumwana as an example. When Lumwana was purchased by Barrick, they paid $7.3 billion for that asset, which was only 900 million tons, and copper was about $1.80 a pound. Well, when we were working in that area initially, copper was $1.50, $1.80 a pound. No one was interested in copper in general, let alone in an African country. So, add
Yeah.
super tough market conditions to that. It's almost more a miracle that our team managed to hang on to this thing all those years than anything else. And, they took a few different tacks along the way. At one point, they had an earn-in with Rio Tinto. They did very little work and eventually moved on to other things. Different groups involved in different ways, but at the end of the day, we retained 100% of this and kept all that upside, and we've been able to attack this project with full ownership. And I think that's really important as part of the thesis towards why we do things and how we do them is you want ownership. If you're going to be working towards M&A, that is certainly our goal eventually is to have somebody come in and buy this once it's advanced and developed. Um, you want to own it. You want all that upside, and that's something we have.
Adrian, you mentioned all the other companies and groups in the area. If you can talk a little bit more about how that de-risk your story, how that gives you advantages, and if you can also talk a little bit about just kind of the comps. I don't know if you got, I mean, I know that you talked about the size, the grade, the near surface, but like
Sure.
what are the best comps in the area or other places that you have? Because I noticed that your market cap seems to have grown exponentially. And so if you can also touch upon that, there's a lot of going on here, but if you can
Yeah.
address some of these.
Sure. So if you want to look at comps, you want to look at the area and the jurisdiction. I mean, this is people use the term elephant country when they're referring to different areas you can explore. Um, I'll set the stage for you. And when you look at this area, the Domes region, you have the mines I mentioned, First Quantum's Sentinel Mine, First Quantum's Kansanshi Mine, Barrick's Lumwana Mine, Ivanhoe's Kamoa-Kakula, China Molybdenum's Tenke deposit. Every one of those is over 1 billion tons. And sit for a second and let that think in or sink in. That is an area that's only 200 kilometers by 200 kilometers, and every deposit I just mentioned is over 1 billion tons. Um, it's probably one of the only spots on the planet that has that kind of mineral endowment. These are vast deposits, but here's the real kicker. Every single one of those sits right at surface. These aren't deep, these aren't underground, these are perfect open pittable deposits. Every one of those is an open pit deposit, which means that they have a lower operating grade and much lower operating cost, but more importantly, a lower capex to get them into production. So this is an area where if you find it, you can build it. These are big deposits sitting right at surface. And if you compare that to an area like Chile or Panama or Arizona, or Argentina or any of these other prolific copper districts, those deposits are typically porphyry, which means you might get bigger, splashier intercepts, meaning broader intercepts because they're a different style of mineralization. They're effectively a ball of mineralization under the ground, but they're typically between 1 and 2 kilometers underground and often at high elevation. So if you're going to build something and it's 2 kilometers underground, what does that do to your cost? It sends them through the roof. Now add to that, putting them at high elevation, that just creates more hurdles, more difficulty. And that's why you hear about these things coming with a 10 and $12 billion capex to build them. That's something that is going to be right off the bat is going to kill a lot of really great projects or otherwise great projects. In this jurisdiction, you don't have any of those hindrances. So this is an area where truly, if you find it, you can build it. And it's an area that has attracted all of those major mining companies for exactly that reason. Then if you think about the global copper deficit, if we're to quote Robert Friedland, and what he would tell you right now is that the world needs to find a 10 million ton contained copper deposit, meaning a deposit like Lumwana, which is right beside us, that has 9 or 10 million tons of copper contained every year for the next 25 years. Well, there hasn't been one in this belt for 22 years. So if you need one every year for the next 10 years or 20 years or 25 years, where the heck are you going to find it? Right? So this is one of the
Yeah.
places where you can truly find an asset that could have an impact on that global copper deficit. It can be in production quickly. It's going to come with a low price tag to build, and it's going to be a high margin producer, meaning you're going to make money hand over fist. So these are very special deposits, and it's a very special jurisdiction for that reason. So I think there was a second part to that, Steve, but I just rambled through that part. But a lot of
No,
info.
you're
What was the other
if you can
piece?
the de-risking
Yeah, the
with
de-risking.
the de-risking story part of it, if you can talk little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, for us, look, it's you're going in to explore an asset like Dumbwa. It's a big asset. Okay. This is a big target. This is a target we walked into saying we think it'll be like the mines around us. I do remember you asked about similarities and looking at any analogs or anything that, what do you compare
Comps.
it to? How do you comp it? If you're looking at comps globally, you can start to get into other assets, but then you start to be looking at porphyry deposits. It gets a little tough. If you want to comp it, the easiest is to go with something else in the camp. And so I always use Lumwana. So let's go through the story of Lumwana. Lumwana was owned by Equinox. Lumwana was 900 million tons. I think it averaged at a grade of about zero point 0.5. And Barrick decided to enter the jurisdiction and purchase Lumwana from Equinox, and they paid $7.3 billion. So let that one sink in for a second.
Yeah.
7.3 billion. 900 million tons. Copper is $1.50 a pound, and Barrick pays 7.3 billion for this thing. They clearly believed in the potential of what it could be, but it wasn't until they brought a fellow 4 years ago. They actually bought it 20 years ago and struggled with it for a number of years, trying to figure out how it all worked and how the geology hung together. 4 years ago, they brought a fellow named Kevin Bonnell on board, and Kevin Bonnell was a geologist, spent most of his career with Freeport-McMoRan, and Kevin unlocked Lumwana for Barrick and took it from a 900 million ton deposit to a 1.6 billion ton deposit in 24 months, giving them 62 years of mine life and 9 million tons of contained copper. Now, that is one heck of an analog. And here's the kicker. Kevin wrote a report to Mark Bristow, to the CEO of Barrick, and recommended Dumbwa as an acquisition target. He eventually quit his job at Barrick and joined our team. So Kevin believes in it. He saw the similarity. And what we have is a system that is geologically analogous or almost identical to what Lumwana is. It's a basement hosted copper sulfide deposit, and the mineralization sits in multiple layers, one stacked on top of each other, running for many kilometers at surface. So it's a relatively simplistic thing, but what I would say to that is just keep in mind, this is still exploration. Got a lot of work to do. We're starting to get an understanding of what this thing looks like, but we've only drilled 7.5 kilometers out of 20. We're a third of the way along. There is a lot of room here for surprises and upside.
So, in terms of upside, in terms of where you are in the process, the Lassonde curve, the inning you're in, it seems like it's pretty early. If you can talk a little bit about the value that investor would get right now, what people think it could become, and then
Mhm.
I'd love to get your input on that first, and then I'll ask you about your staff.
For sure. So when you think of it, we just went through this comp exercise. You can think about Lumwana as a bit of a comp in terms of valuation of a billion-ton deposit in this belt. So where we are today, we've been drilling very aggressively. So we went into this with an approach that's very atypical for a junior. So we didn't go into this saying, we're going to poke a few holes and do some big step outs and arm wave a deposit before we get there. We went in, we raised $30 million. We set up a program that was essentially fence drilling. And for anybody that doesn't know geologically what fence drilling is, it's when you lay out a grid of lines, much like I described for the geochem sampling at the beginning of the conversation. You lay out lines running east to west across the system, across this big copper system. You space those lines every 100 meters moving to the north. In our case, it's over 20 kilometers. And then you drill every 50 meters across the system from the east to west or west to east. So what that means is you end up with a grid of drill holes, very tightly spaced, and over the entire corridor looking for the east and west edges of this thing. And so what it allows you to do is very quickly delineate the overall footprint or the overall mineralized area at Dumbwa. And then you can go back in on the second pass and be more refined and more targeted and go after those areas that are showing the highest grade and the most potential for tonnage that would be mineable. And so we've gone in and drilled at a rate of almost 10,000 meters a month. And thinking about that, I mean, most companies do 5 or 10,000 meters a season. We've been doing 10,000 meters a month since last August. So we've now drilled 7.5 kilometers out of the overall 20 kilometer footprint. And what it's doing is giving us a very clear understanding of what Dumbwa looks like and what it is. And, we have this very broad mineralized corridor. Some parts of that are higher grade than others. And so what we figure Dumbwa really is a series of pockets or pods or deposits sitting linearly on strike. So starting at the southern boundary of our property, you have one
Yep.
high grade zone separated by a lower grade structure, another pocket of higher grade, another area that we have to go through to get to the next pocket of higher grade. And we think that'll be the pattern across the entire system. And so you're trying to quickly delineate those, and in our case, finishing that in 12 months. So now we can go back and start to be more targeted with our drilling, address some of the more exploratory targets to the west of Dumbwa, to the east of Dumbwa, to the north of the main Dumbwa zone. And at the same time, go back to those areas where we do have great mineralization that's higher grade and start to delineate that and show the public what it really is.
Could you talk a little bit about Kazhiba or
Yeah, for
Kazhiba,
sure.
and
Yeah,
then how
so
does that fit into the big picture?
Kazhiba started out as a target. So just to kind of give you a visual, you can sort of try and imagine where these sit. Dumbwa sits in the southeast corner of our property, and about 20 kilometers to the northwest is Kazhiba. Kazhiba sits directly across from First Quantum's Kansanshi mine. It's about 6 kilometers away. And Kazhiba was a very high grade surface target. So it was an area where we noticed that we had some very high grade intercepts. And when I say high grade, I'm talking 21 meters of 10.5% copper, 21 meters of 5.5%. I mean, ridiculously high grade intercepts. And what it was ultra high grade malachite suspended in soil. And so we did some work up there. And typically with these, you'll often find oxide copper at surface with a sulfide system sitting underneath it. And in the case of Kazhiba, we never did find a sulfide target associated. But what we found was a large footprint with this high-grade malachite. And so last year we drilled it off. We drilled 350 holes. We took it to an indicated resource, and in January we published that resource. So it's 2.33 million tons at 1.41% copper. It starts right at surface, runs to a maximum depth of 30 meters, and it's a perfect source feed for any SXEW circuit in the area, or any oxide copper processing facility. And of course, you have First Quantum 6 kilometers away with an SXEW circuit that has excess sulfuric acid, and it'd be a perfect fit as source feed. So that started the process. We've delineated it. Now we've put it up for sale. Now, the reason we've done that is really simple. We can either go back to the market one day for additional funding when we need it for Dumbwa, or we can sell Kazhiba to get the capital we need in a non-dilutive way. And that's exactly what we've been in the process of doing. So we've got that underway. There's not much I can say because it's all under NDA. But what I
Yeah.
can say is we are in the process of trying to sell Kazhiba. We want to monetize that asset and use those funds to further Dumbwa without dilution.
Adrian, you mentioned dilution. If you can give us, if we can shift a little bit and talk about your share structure as well as options, warrants, as well as ownership. Who are the major players involved? Institutions, major
Sure.
uh, insiders.
So we have currently about 213 million shares out. Of those, shockingly highly held by inside groups and groups that are close to us. So we have about 213 out total. There's 48 million warrants that are out on top of that, and those are at 33 cents. There's another block of warrants associated with a financing we did last year at $1.35. We raised 30.5 million at that point, and there was a warrant attached to that at $2 as well. Now, all of the warrants expire in 2027, so there's lots of runway left on those. We're not seeing any overhang with those. But what we did with the company when I started out working here, which has been about 4 years now, we built a strategy around financing in sort of bigger tranches. The first group, or the first financing we did was $10 million at 22 cents. We then also raised 35 or 30.5 million at $1.35 last year. And that has given us a really nice, big, healthy treasury to attack Dumbwa with. We're still sitting on over 20 million in the bank per our last financials.
Is that
And
U.S. or Canadian?
that's Canadian.
Okay.
And so if you look at the groups that have come in and really gotten involved, when we started out with this plan 3 or 4 years ago, there wasn't a single institutional holder in Midnight Sun. Now we're 35+% institutional. And when you look at that financing we did in October of last year, $30 million, it was 15 funds headed up by 1832's 9 Point in Libra. So you've got three of the biggest funds that you would want in the deal. We've got another 12 funds on top of that. So it's actually significant on the institutional side. And the insiders here control about 14%. So significant insider holdings, very significant institutional holdings. No corporates, no strategics as of yet, but that's part of the design. We want to make sure that there's an opportunity here for somebody to eventually own this, and for them to own it. We want to make sure that there's nothing that would be a deterrent. So.
Adrian, last question for you. If you can tell us a little bit about Alfabro, yourself, the team, just why you guys might have the right pieces in play. And then if you can also tell us where to find you and follow your story.
Sure. So the company was put together, actually, if you can believe this, it was a spin out from something called ATAC, or Attack Resources, a number of years ago. They were working in the Yukon. They had a bunch of assets, gold assets that they didn't know what to do with. They spun them out into this company, which was Midnight Sun, which is why it's called Midnight Sun, Land of the Midnight Sun up north. And Al Fabro got involved 14 years ago, came in and took over this company. And very shortly after they did that, they took on this Zambian asset. So we call it the Solwezi Project. Al has been around the business for a very long time. He's a broker and has been, around the financing mining project side for probably 40 plus years. had a prolific career, worked for Yorkton and Canaccord, and formed a company called Rox Gold, which discovered the Yaramoko deposit in Burkina Faso. That ended up sold to Fortuna for around $1 billion. And Al is our CEO. He's been here from day one. Myself, I've been with the company for about 3.5, 4 years now. Came from a group called Oxygen Capital, where we had a lot of successes. And I was very fortunate there to work with a fellow named Dr. Mark O'Day, who has, done very well at Frontier Gold and Liberty Gold and Discovery Metals, Discovery Silver. Lots of big success stories. True Gold is another one. That's the Karma mine in Burkina Faso. We all come from a place of deep experience. And we came together to do this project about 4 years ago. It was a perfect opportunity for me. I spent my entire life, my entire career in this business, started out in IR and ended up a director of the PDAC and running various companies. But for me, and I think I speak for our entire team when I say it's all about projects with scale. We don't want to work on small things and things that don't have the potential to be truly game changing. And I think when you look at Dumbwa, you look at what we're doing in Solwezi and in the Copperbelt. This is the kind of project that can be globally impactful, and the team came together to do that. So we really set it up perfectly for something that could be a huge win. In terms of where to find me, I'm pretty easy to get to. You can go to the website. My contact details are there, but it's Adrian at midnightsunmining.com if you want to email me if you have questions following this. My phone number is there as well. It's a direct line that'll reach me no matter where I'm traveling or pitching or doing what I do. Um, and that's it. We're easy to get to. We're always out there on the road and telling the story as much as possible. So hopefully we'll be somewhere that you can meet up with us in person one day.
I hope so too. But for our listeners, I want to disclose that I am currently not an investor in Midnight Sun Mining, although that may potentially change. I am a big uh, fan of the copper story, and I'm kind of embarrassed. I haven't known about you guys before, so it's good to hear about you guys. I am not giving any investment advice, however. Please do your own due diligence. One of the ways you can do that is to reach out to Adrian, as he mentioned, follow the ticker, the website. And so you go ahead and do that. And Adrian, thank you so much for your time and help. I enjoyed it.
Really appreciate it, Steve. Thank you.